Welcome to the 2015 Evolution of Medicine Summit. This year's summit has no sponsors. Instead, we're using this opportunity to launch a cost-saving alternative to conventional health insurance. It's called Liberty Direct, and we believe it's the missing link to help every health-conscious American affordably achieve and maintain good health. Liberty Direct is a healthcare cost-sharing program that uses the power of community to create the first proven alternative to commercial insurance. If the costs and limitations of health insurance are keeping you or your patients from getting the care they need, this could be the perfect solution. To learn more, please click on the links below. Hello and welcome back to the Evolution of Medicine Summit, Healthcare from Scratch. We are in the practitioner segment of the summit, and we are now here. I'm very excited to welcome to the Evolution of Medicine Summit for the first time, Dr. Nicholas Gonzalez. He is a conventionally trained immunologist who now does advanced nutritional work for cancer and other degenerative diseases here in New York, and it's such a pleasure to have you here on the Evolution of Medicine Summit, Dr. Gonzalez.
Well, James, thank you for having me. It's a great pleasure to be here, and I appreciate the opportunity to reach out to our colleagues.
Great. So, we really enjoyed your talk on the Functional Forum, and, had a lot of desire for people to hear more about, the way that you work with people. You're speaking right now to probably some patients who are listening in, but mainly practitioners of all varieties, MDs, right through to health coaches and everything in between. Now, if I were to categorize one thing that all of these practitioners do is they give dietary recommendations. And I just wanted to start there for today because I would say that most practitioners that I've met have an idea of what they feel like a healthy diet is and recommend that to their patients. But that's not really the way that you operate, even though diet is a huge part of your work. So maybe you could just start by sharing sort of maybe some of the rationale and some of the work that you do with nutrition with your patients.
Our program involves three basic components: individualized diet, individualized supplement programs with large doses of pancreatic enzymes for cancer patients, and third component would be the detoxification routines, such as the infamous coffee enemas. But in terms of diet specifically, diet's absolutely critical because food is the fuel that feeds the body. And you've got to put the right fuel into the right engine in order to get maximum efficiency. For example, if you have a Mercedes-Benz, you're going to put diesel fuel into it. If you have a steam engine, you're going to put water into it. You put water into a Mercedes engine, you ruin your car. If you put diesel fuel or gasoline into a steam engine, it will blow up. Humans are about as varied as those two examples. And we don't just have one diet. Unlike most conventional and unconventional doctors interested in nutrition, who usually have one diet that they prescribe for everybody, we have 10 basic diets that range from largely plant-based raw foods to an Atkins-type red meat diet, a ketogenic-type diet where we put people on fatty red meat 3 times a day, and literally scores of variations of the 10 basic diets. And we do special testing to determine which diet each patient who walks into our office would do best with. So we don't have one size fits all. We think that's a mistake. And in terms of the anthropology of nutrition, when one goes back and studies the work of Weston Price, for example, who traveled the world looking at traditional cultures that were living according to traditional agricultural and hunting practices, he found that humans adjusted to and thrived on a variety of diets. The diets range from the Eskimos, who lived on nothing but fatty red meat, 80% fat, 20% protein, to the tribes living in the Congo or the Amazon, was largely a plant-based diet. You go to the Maasai in Kenya, they lived on a gallon of raw milk a day. Colin Campbell has made a career of attacking milk as the enemy of civilized man. However, you get the Maasai who lived on a gallon of raw milk a day, raw, not pasteurized, and blood, no fruits, vegetables, nuts, seeds, or grains, and they were among the healthiest people ever studied. George Mand at Vanderbilt University during the 70s and 80s studied the traditional Maasai, and even though they ate 70% of their calories as saturated fat, were extremely healthy, no heart disease, no cancer, no diabetes, no arthritis, even in the oldest Maasai. The point of that is different groups adapted to, adjusted to, and thrived on completely different diets. The Eskimos never ate milk. The Maasai, of course, never ate seal blubber. So different people adjusted to, thrived on different diets. And the idea that we can force humans today, particularly in America, which is a melting pot, to fit into one dietary category, it doesn't make scientific or rational sense. So we approach each patient individually. We have no preconceived notions. Every patient that comes into our office gets tested. We determine what diet they need. And even with the dozens of variations of the 10 basic diets, we'll individualize it to the patient's needs according to whatever allergies they may have or proclivities. But everything's very individualized. There isn't one diet for everybody. One of the problems we face with the traditional nutritional teaching is that you have proponents and experts that will promote one diet. Like Preconceived and Ornish believe everybody should be on a vegetarian diet. And the Pritikin diet was 75% carbohydrates, about 15% protein, all from plant sources, and less than 10% fat, again, all from plant sources. And Pritikin and his successor, Ornish, believes all humans, whatever their size, shape, form, genetics, geographic origins of their ancestors, should follow a purely vegetarian, plant-based diet. Then you get Bob Atkins, whom I knew very well, who practiced here in New York for years. He was famous as the ketogenic diet doctor. He put all his patients on a high-fat diet, and he had patients that didn't do well. I knew him very well, and he would insist they just weren't compliant. And I would talk to him and say, Bob, these are patients that need to be on plant food. He would never acknowledge that. Then you get someone like Gerald Reaven out at Stanford, who is a proponent of the Mediterranean type diet, where he thinks all humans, again, whatever their size, shape, form, genetics, geographic origins of their ancestors, cultural beliefs, should be on a balanced diet. With his diet's about 40% calories from fat, 45% from carbohydrates, and about 15% protein, and both plant and animal sources, fruits, vegetables, nuts, seeds, whole grains, fish, poultry, some red meat, good quality fats. So you have these three trends in nutrition, both in conventional alternative nutrition. The vegetarian proponents who are very fanatical about their beliefs that all humans should be on a vegetarian diet. The people who follow Atkins and the current ketogenic diet promoters, I think everyone should be on a high-fat diet. Then Reaven and the Mediterranean followers who say everyone should be on a balanced type diet, a Mediterranean diet. And they all have a piece of the truth, but what they do is they generalize from their particular experience where some people may have done well in their particular diet. I think all humans would, again, whatever their background, should be on that diet. We approach it differently. We assume every patient that walks into our office needs a unique diet for their particular needs, and it may range from largely plant-based, like an Ornish diet, to a ketogenic type Atkins diet, and everywhere in between.
That's so interesting. Do you feel like potentially the message of that doesn't travel as quickly or as fast because it's not it's not flashy and it's not one size fits all?
We've been approached by, it's interesting you should say that, we get approached by publishers routinely because I'm well known, I'm here in New York, and the publishing world is in New York, and they just can't conceive of how they could write a popular book where you use a variety of different diets, because it's not, as they use the term prescriptive, it's not prescriptive. They love books where one size fits all. And of course, a lot of the very successful nutritional books for the last few years always have the word power in it, power carbs, power protein, power fats. They're getting away from that. And every 6 months there's a new diet book that sells millions of copies and suggests one diet for everybody. Ornish's book sold millions, Atkins' books sold tens of millions, and Reaven's book has sold well too. And they're all promoting completely different types of diet, insisting everyone should follow their particular diet. And you start reading this stuff, and all it does is lead to confusion. In fact, one of the things we've learned with a lot of lay people as well as professionals get interested in nutrition, they'll read Ornish and they think everyone should be vegetarian. They read Atkins and he makes a case everyone should be meat eater. They read Reaven, everyone should be on a Mediterranean diet. And they walk away with this really well-intentioned interest in nutrition, totally confused and unsure of what they should do if they're practitioners, what they should do with their patients. So a lot of this conflicting information really is not helpful. And it could be easily resolved if the practitioners and the experts and the people who write these books realize different people need different diets. It's not a complicated concept, and it's not as if this is something we made up. If you read Weston Price, who published this book in 1939, the results of his 7-year study traveling the world, you realize that different groups adjusted to completely different diets, and they thrived on them. So different people need different diets.
That's so interesting. So what is the scientific rationale for prescribing different doses and forms of nutrients for different patients?
Well, we use diet and supplements differently, again, than a lot of practitioners, alternative and conventional. Everything we do is geared toward bringing the autonomic nervous system into balance. Now, without wishing to get too technical, I'll give the 1-minute version of the autonomic nervous system. The autonomic nervous system was named by Langley in 1898, and autonomic is just a play on the word automatic. And basically, this is the unconscious nervous system that controls all physiological processes like respiration, cardiovascular function, digestion, endocrine function, immune function, that doesn't require conscious input. And it's divided into two branches, the sympathetic and the parasympathetic, and the details aren't important. But we believe that disease occurs when the autonomic nervous system is out of balance. After all, that controls all physiological and biochemical processes in the body. It's the ultimate regulator of metabolism in the body. And when that's out of balance, you end up with serious problems. Now, it's not just, again, our idea. Francis Pottinger Sr. wrote a brilliant book, 1944. We discussed the autonomic nervous system and its basis in balance as the basis of human disease. And Ernst Gellhorn, who was a professor at the University of Minnesota, had published 400 papers and 8 textbooks on the autonomic imbalance as the basis of disease. And what we're trying to do with diet and supplements is bring an out-of-balance autonomic system into balance. For example, if a patient comes in with a strong sympathetic nervous system, they need to be on a plant-based diet, and they need to be on certain supplements like beta-carotene, the B vitamins, thiamine, riboflavin, niacin, cardoxin, and folic acid. They don't do well with B12, choline, inositol, PABA, pantothenic acid. They do well with high doses of C. They do well with high doses of D. They do not do well with high doses of E. They do terribly with calcium, but great with magnesium. Forget the 2-to-1 calcium to magnesium ratio. With our sympathetic dominant patients, where we're trying to tone down their strong sympathetic system, we'll put them on 1,000, 1,200 milligrams of magnesium, maybe 150 milligrams of calcium. It's like an 8-to-1 ratio of magnesium to calcium. They do well with certain trace minerals, manganese, chromium, but not zinc and selenium. They do well with the plant-based essential fats from flaxseed or other nut and seed oils like flaxseed, hemp oil. They do well with those. They don't do well with fish oil. Other patients coming to us have a strong parasympathetic nervous system and a weak sympathetic system, and these are the patients that will thrive on a meat diet. These are the kind of patients that would go to Atkins and thrive. They need lots of fatty red meat. They really do well with it. That helps bring the strong parasympathetic system down a bit and builds up their weak sympathetic system. Fatty red meat has certain nutrients in it that have a very strong effect on the autonomic nervous system. For example, fatty meat is loaded with sulfates and phosphates that in the body are converted into free acid. And what that does is it tones down the sympathetic system. Also, fatty meat has lots of phenylalanine and tyrosine, which are the precursors to the sympathetic neurotransmitters norepinephrine and epinephrine. So when you give somebody red meat, you're turning on their sympathetic system, you're turning down their parasympathetic system. Fatty meat has lots of saturated fat, which was demonized for the last 50 years. Fortunately, that's starting to change. Whatever saturated fat may do, it's a strong sympathetic stimulant. So someone who has a strong parasympathetic system, weak sympathetic system, you're trying to bring it into balance, red meat with lots of saturated fat is absolutely perfect for them. Those patients do well with a whole other set of nutrients. They don't do well with thiamine, riboflavin, niacin, cardoxin, folic acid, but do well with B12, pantothenic acid, choline, inositol, PABA. They don't do well with high doses of C. These are the people that take high doses of C and feel sick. They don't do well with high doses of D. Sorry, Dr. Cannell, who thinks everyone should be on high doses of D. They don't, but they thrive on E. They thrive on calcium. Our strong parasympathetic dominants, who often get the blood-borne tumors like leukemia, lymphoma, myeloma, and sarcomas, which are connective tissue tumors, they'll do well with 2,500 milligrams of calcium and maybe 100 milligrams of magnesium. They do terribly with magnesium. Magnesium makes them depressed, and they read all this literature about the value of magnesium, go on, and they go into depression for 3 days and can't figure out why. They think that they're morally weak because they can't tolerate magnesium, but it's just their innate metabolism. They need huge amounts of calcium. 10, 15 times as much calcium as magnesium. They don't do well with manganese and chromium, but do well with zinc and selenium. They do really well with the polyunsaturated fats from fish oil. These are the patients that actually can tolerate fish oil. Don't do as well with flaxseed oil, hemp oil, chia seeds. They don't do as well with those fatty acid sources. They need the animal-based, not the plant-based sources of essential fatty acids. And they'll thrive on a completely different diet and a completely different set of supplements than what we call our sympathetic dominant patient. Then we have balanced people who have a equally strong sympathetic and parasympathetic system, but they may be functioning at an inefficient level. They're both genetically determined to be equally strong, but they're not working too efficiently. And they need all kinds of vitamins. First, in terms of diet, they do well with plant foods. These are the people that do well on a Mediterranean diet. Fruits, vegetables, nuts, seeds. Yeah, they tolerate grains fine. Fish, poultry, some red meat, cheese. These balanced people do well with dairy products like, of course, raw milk, whole milk, cheese. They do well with a variety of vitamins and minerals, beta-carotene, vitamin A, all the different B vitamins, moderate doses of C, moderate doses of E, moderate doses of E, all the fat-soluble vitamins, moderate doses of K. They do well with moderate doses of calcium, magnesium, potassium, manganese, chromium, zinc, and selenium. And do well with both plant-based sources of essential fats as well as the fish-based and animal-based sources of essential fats. So they need a variety of nutrients at moderate doses. So every diet and every supplement program has to be really carefully thought out, because every food, every amino acid, fatty acid, every component of food, things like the sulfates, phosphates, the vitamins, minerals, trace elements, whatever else they may do as antioxidants, they all have a very profound effect on the autonomic nervous system. And if you discount that or don't consider that, you can end up creating metabolic chaos in your patients. And what we do is precisely design our diets and supplements after determining the level of autonomic imbalance in our patients, using the diet and supplements to bring the autonomic system into balance. And that's when magic occurs in the patients.
That's so interesting that you say that. So what are some of the things that you look for as you're doing your intake, what are some of the tests that you do to determine the sympathetic or parasympathetic dominance, or other things that you do to individualize this? Because it sounds like it takes quite a while.
Well, actually, we have it kind of simplified now after my 27 years in practice and my predecessor, William Kelly, the eccentric dentist who did a lot of the work. Kelly developed a system of looking at standard blood work and determining whether someone with a sympathetic dominant, parasympathetic dominant balance. And there are a formula that he has that we have here. I mean, no one's really been that interested in our work. You know, the conventional people hope they get hit by a bus. The alternative people are still into the one-size-fits-all. But we have formulas with blood work that you can use that really help you determine that. In addition, we've developed a hair test that, based on the chemistry of the hair, very accurately tells us whether someone's a sympathetic, parasympathetic dominant balance, how efficient they are, how inefficient they are. But there are also clinical signs, and a good clinician can pick this up right away. There's no magic to it or some secret that only I have. You know, I've been doing this for 27 years. A patient can walk into my office. I don't even need the blood work or the hair test. I can pretty much assess them based on my experience. You know, experience is a great thing as a clinician. I've been doing long enough to get that kind of experience. For example, patients that get the typical solid tumors, like tumors of the breast, lung, stomach, pancreas, colon, liver, uterus, ovary, prostate, always have a strong sympathetic system and a weak parasympathetic system. That's one of the reasons they get those cancers. So immediately, if someone walks in with breast cancer or colon, you know they need to be on a plant-based diet. Patients that get the traditional blood-borne or immune cancers, leukemia, lymphoma, myeloma, or sarcomas, which are genetically related to the immune cancers, they're connective tissue cancers, they need to be on meat. These are the people that will thrive on a ketogenic diet. Balanced people with a balanced autonomic system, they don't tend to get cancer, but they can get chronic fatigue and allergies and those kind of things. And again, if they're a non-cancer patient, you can pretty much pick up whether they're balanced or not based on their psychology. Tells you a lot. Sympathetic dominance, as we call them, tend to be very aggressive. That what would be called a type A. They make good business leaders, good trial lawyers. They like to argue. They like to regulate everyone else's life, make rules for everyone else. Parasympathetics are very creative. They don't do well in school, they don't do well with authority, they don't do well with regimented situations, they don't do well in office situations. They do best if they're left to their own and be very creative. You know, like Ernest Hemingway is a classic parasympathetic dominant. Never even went to college and was a mediocre high school student. He ends up winning the Nobel Prize in Literature. Very undisciplined, but very creative. So parasympathetics tend to be creative. These are general rules. Balanced people, somewhere in between, they can fit in with regimentation and authority. They can also be creative at certain times. So just by the patient's personality or lifestyle of what they're doing, you kind of know where they are. If someone walks in and they're a business executive with prostate cancer, you immediately know they're a strong sympathetic dominant, and they need to be on that patient like that who's been a leader in his business community, you know they're extremely sympathetic dominant. They need to be on a really plant-based diet with lots of fruits, vegetables, nuts, seeds, and grains, and not too much animal protein.
So, Doc, I know you've spent a lot of time in your career investigating the work of Dr. William Kelly. First of all, you know, before we get into sort of how that investigation went and the publishing of it, what were the results that you found from that studying?
Yeah, I was a second-year medical student, actually at the end of my second year, July 1981, 1,000 years ago, when I first had the opportunity to meet Kelly. And what was interesting is that he opened up his records to me, and I was a medical student at the time, but my mentor was Robert Good, who was president of Sloan Kettering. He was encouraging my research career. I went to Cornell Medical School here in New York because Good was associated with Cornell and Sloan Kettering, and I wanted to work under him. And he adopted me into his research group after my second year in medical school. And when I met Kelly, I went to Dr. Good and I said, you know, here's this guy who claims he has reversing cancer with this complicated system where he's manipulating the autonomic nervous system using enzymes and coffee animals. It didn't make a lot of sense to me. But Good said you should start looking into him. I had a grant for the summer. So I went down to Dallas, Texas, where Kelly was based, and started going through his records. And from day one, even though I'd had 2 years of medical school, which isn't a huge amount, but I knew enough to see that these were remarkable cancer patients. He had patients with pancreatic cancer, metastatic colon cancer, metastatic breast into the bone, were alive 5 and 10 years and 15 years later, clearly just having been treated by him after failing standard therapy. And after 2 or 3 weeks, I gathered together dozens of these cases, brought them back to Dr. Good, who said these are remarkable cases. We spent hours together going over them. And he encouraged me to begin a formal research investigation of Kelly that I finished when I was a fellow under his group. By that point, he'd been pushed out of Sloan Kettering, and I followed him ultimately down to Old Children's Hospital in Florida, where he set up a bone marrow transplant unit. And I went through over 1,000 of Kelly's records, interviewed 455 of his patients. And I still follow some of his patients today. There was a woman who was diagnosed with metastatic pancreatic cancer in 1982. It was actually August 1982. She went to surgery. They thought she had gallbladder disease. opened her up, and she had a tumor in the pancreas, tumor in the liver. They biopsied the liver tumor, and it turned out to be adenocarcinoma, which is the most aggressive form of pancreatic cancer. Closed her up. This was in Appleton, Wisconsin, where she lived. She decided to go to the Mayo Clinic, where they reviewed the slides, confirmed the diagnosis, and decided that chemotherapy would be useless, and told her that she should just get her affairs into order. She had heard about Kelly through the word-of-mouth grapevine in the health food stores, came under his care, and 33 years later, in August it'll be 33 years, she's alive and well. She's never gone back to have CAT scans, so I don't know if the tumors are gone. But here's a patient with stage 4 pancreatic cancer, biopsy-proven liver metastases, confirmed in a major academic institution, i.e. the Mayo Clinic, who's alive 33 years later. To put her case in perspective, I know no patient in the history of medicine, and I check the literature regularly, with stage 4 biopsy-proven liver metastases from pancreatic adenocarcinoma was alive 33 years later. That's the kind of patient we found, and it was case after case like this of terminal disease who got well under his care. I'd never seen anything like it, nor had Dr. Good, who was president of Sloan Kettering and the most published author in the history of medicine, etc. He admitted he would never say this publicly because investigating someone like Kelly is a controversial thing, and it's a career risk for someone in that position in the academic medical world. But he supported me for 5 years, and I eventually put my results together in a monograph form, which initially we couldn't get published because the editors couldn't believe that someone who had no academic affiliation, and Kelly was a dentist, he wasn't even supposed to be treating cancer technically, someone with no academic affiliation, no fame within the academic medical world was producing these kind of results. So the general consensus of the editors who reviewed the monograph was it had to be fake, that I had somehow conned Dr. Good, or it wasn't real, or I'd been snookered, or he'd been snookered. The fact is they were real. In fact, we followed some of these patients in our immunology clinic back 30 years ago, and I follow some of these patients today. So they're alive and well, like 33 years later. So we finally got the book published in, I think it was about 2009, called One Man Alone, where I have 50 case reports of patients treated by Kelly with appropriately diagnosed, biopsy-proven, terminal or very poor prognosis cancer, alive 5, 10, 15 years later, in most cases with obvious radiographic evidence of regression of disease. So it would meet all the criteria. There's biopsy-proven, confirmed, regression of disease on scans in most cases, and certainly long survival. And many of these patients were diagnosed in major institutions like the Mayo Clinic, Sloan Kettering, Stanford, Dana-Farber, Harvard. So it took us a while to get it out, but finally in 2009 we decided to finally get it published. I updated, rewrote it, and it's out there. So the results were extraordinary. There was another patient that's just really extraordinary. She was diagnosed in 1969 with uterine cancer. It was so big at that time they couldn't do surgery, so they decided to do radiation first. Then the tumor shrunk, so they did a hysterectomy, and they told her she was cured. She was cured until about 1975, 5 years later, when she developed a big tumor in her pelvis and tumors in her lungs. Endometrial cancer, uterine cancer notoriously spreads to the lungs. It was inoperable, but they said we should take out the pelvic tumor because you're going to have an obstruction. It would make the end of your life more pleasant if we take that out. They took her to surgery, just palliatively took out this pelvic tumor, which is about to obstruct her colon, and it was metastatic, poorly differentiated endometrial cancer, the most aggressive form of endometrial cancer, which is totally unresponsive to chemo and radiation. She went on hormone therapy for a while, which was an experimental thing, didn't work. Then she went to see Kelly. Well, she died at age 95 years old in 2009, 40 years after she was diagnosed, and 34 years after she was diagnosed with stage 4 disease. To put her in perspective, I know no patient in the history of medicine, and I checked the literature, alive 34 years later with proven biopsy-documented metastatic stage 4 endometrial cancer, and her original diagnosis goes back to 1969. So when she died in 2009 at 95 years old from old age, quietly in her sleep, and I kept in touch with her all the decades after I interviewed her for my study. She was in superb health and lived to be 95. So she was another example of it. These were not just unusual patients, these are extraordinary patients. We have patients like that.
That's amazing. So, your work on Dr. Kelly and the review, where has that gone in terms of the academic literature? Why don't more people know about this?
I guess ignorance is his own best defense. They figure if they ignore me, maybe I'll die suddenly or get hit by a truck on Park Avenue and they won't have to worry about me. Certainly a lot of academicians know about me because, I wasn't living in a cave or working in a cave. My mentor was the most published author in the history of medicine and president of Sloan Kettering for 10 years. I went to Cornell to work under him. I lived in his house when I joined his group as a fellow. He was more than just, some vague teacher. He really mentored me. I used to spend Christmas with him and his family. That's how close we were. Didn't matter. I mean, after it got known in the academic world that I was getting these unusual results, he started getting letters from colleagues, and he knew, I met Nobel Prize winners through him. He knew a lot of people. They would say, Dr. Good, Robert, and he would show me these letters. You're risking your career. And he'd been nominated for the Nobel Prize 3 times, and you can only be nominated 3 times. He was up for the 3rd time back in the 80s, and he was being warned that your involvement with this kind of quackery and craziness is going to jeopardize your chance of winning the Nobel Prize. So academicians at the highest level of the academic medical world, far from being the open-minded scientists that we would like to believe, in the TV movies that they are, turned out to be just, kind of closed-minded, bigoted. And it was kind of a learning experience for me, because I had approached this with such great innocence that isn't this wonderful? Here's this guy doing this non-toxic, relatively inexpensive treatment for terrible cancer for which there are no other academic treatments or conventional treatments that work. We should all be celebrating. Far from that, it was like just condemnation, and Dr. Good was warned to back off or he's going to jeopardize his chance to win the Nobel Prize, which he ultimately didn't win anyway. There is a book by Dr. James Turner, now deceased, brilliant MD, PhD out of Tulane, who got interested in alternative medicine. He wrote a book called Racketeering in Medicine, very subtle title. In the introduction, he talks about the fact that he believes one of the reasons Dr. Good was pushed out of Sloan Kettering is because he supported people like me. One of the things about Dr. Good, he had an extremely open mind, and here's a guy, president of Sloan, supporting a medical student looking into a notorious alternative practitioner back in 1981, before it was acceptable to talk about cancer and nutrition in the same sentence. But he had the guts to do that, but he took a lot of criticism. And Turner, who knew Good quite well, absolutely believes that one of the reasons the board of directors at Sloan pushed him out was because he was supporting people like me, and then Turner has my name right in the introduction discussing that. So it was extraordinary to me, thinking that scientists are supposed to be these unbiased, unprejudiced seekers of the truth, to learn that it was quite the contrary, that there really a lot of them were just bigoted, prejudiced guys who only believed in what they believed in and didn't want to hear that somebody else was smarter than they were, that somebody, Kelly, who was doing coffee enemas, knew how to cure cancer, when they sophisticated professors at academic institutions couldn't do the same. A lot of jealousy and envy, and just that's what drives medicine, not search for the truth. Of course, we see that with the vaccination issue, where it's a lot of it's ego and money and power. It has nothing to do with science or helping patients. It's the last thing that's important.
Absolutely. So, I mean, how do you compare? I know your practice is not all cancer, but is largely still cancer patients. How do you compare the results that you see in your own practice with what conventional oncologists can do?
A good percentage of our patients, if not most of them, are actually conventional failures. They come after having failed standard chemo, radiation, etc., surgery, and our practice is filled with patients like that who get well. So I don't think, if you looked at it honestly and objectively, there's no comparison. In fact, if there was a comparison, if what we did wasn't any better than conventional medicine, I promise you I'd be doing something else. It isn't worth it to take the political heat from my academic colleagues, the scorn of my colleagues. I turned down 2 positions at Sloan Kettering, where one of the requirements, my professors thought I had a promise as an academic researcher, and they offered me twice the position, which was very gracious of them. But I would have to give up my Crazy Kelly research. This is after I left Dr. Good's group, finished my fellowship. I would have to give up my Kelly research. There's no way. So, you really, it's a tough road to walk for sure. But the results, the only reason you do it, you'd have to be insane not to do it for one reason only. The one reason has to be because the results are better than what anyone else is getting. And I'm trained enough as an academic scientist to know what good results are and what aren't. We have patients with pancreatic cancer for those 15 plus years. We have patients with stage 4 breast cancer, which I guess the form I presented, a pancreatic cancer patient, who've been with us 25 years. Since I opened practice, I have a woman with stage 4 inflammatory breast cancer, the most aggressive form of breast cancer there is, had it into the bone, developed bony metastases while getting aggressive chemotherapy in 1987. She came to me in December 3rd, 1987, just after I had opened up my practice. She's alive and well today, 27 and a half years later. All her disease went away just on our therapy. So when you see results like that the conventional physicians, I say this sadly, I wish they had great results too, but that conventional physicians can't match. In fact, they failed with this patient and she got well in our care. Under our care. That's the only reason to be doing this, because the results are better than what other people are getting.
So let's talk about practicalities for practitioners that are listening to this and are engaged with the Evolution of Medicine Summit. They want to be able to replicate some part of your work. What are the sort of the leverage points for them to be able to do diet and nutrition in a way that is successful and effective and individualized, also with an eye to the fact that, that there's some scale to it as well, in that this can be replicated and not replicated on such a micro scale that everyone needs tons of time. What advice would you give to providers at every level who are looking to do this kind of work with people? What really works?
The first thing I would tell practitioners is get rid of your preconceived notions of what the truth should be. This applies to conventional doctors, of course, but also to alternative doctors who will get caught up into everyone should be on Preconceived diet, everyone should be on the ketogenic diet, and everyone should be on the Mediterranean diet. Get rid of those biases that everyone should be on one type of nutritional program, one type of diet, one type of supplement. Get rid of that, because the whole purpose of what we do is different people. Everybody that walks into your office is an adventurer. Everyone that walks into your office is different than the previous 100 people that walked in your office. And they may need a completely different diet than the previous 100 patients. You have to listen to them. And very often, what we do isn't that esoteric. It's just common sense. If you listen to the patient, they'll tell you what they need. I can't tell you how many dozens of patients we have treated who come into my office having been seen by half a dozen conventional, half a dozen alternative doctors, and because this has been the prejudice over the last 30 years, they should be on a vegetarian diet, and they're doing it perfectly, organic vegetarian, and they're doing terribly, and I've had patient after patient develop leukemia on a vegetarian diet. Well, it turned out they're meat eaters. It's the worst diet for them. They need to be on fatty red meat. And these patients will actually tell you that they get tears in their eyes because I dream about pot roast. They dream about bacon. I think I'm just morally weak. Because Preconceived and Ornish say, this is what people need, morally, spiritually, and physically. And they hate that diet. They don't feel well on it. They end up getting sicker, which is why they come to see me. And it turns out they need to be on meat. So if you listen to your patient, if someone's on a vegetarian diet and tells you they feel terrible, don't assume they're morally weak and that they just, there's some weakness why they don't like the diet. That's not the right diet for them. A gazelle is never going to eat meat. They need to eat grass. And on the other hand, if a patient comes in that feels terrible on a meat diet, and Atkins had a lot of patients like that. I saw them in his office, and he would insist they had to just eat more fat, more meat, and they get sicker and sicker. They need to be on a plant-based diet, and they will tell you, I hate red meat. I had a patient in yesterday who's been with me 18 years with breast cancer, doing beautifully. But we were kind of laughing. She said, you had me typed perfectly when I first came in 1996. And I kind of said, well, what do you mean? She said, I love citrus fruit. I love fruit. I eat huge amounts of fruit. I felt ever since you put me on fruit 18 years ago, I've thrived. I feel great. And of course, the cancer went away too. She hates meat. The thought of bacon makes her nauseated. In fact, she says the smell of chicken, she said this yesterday, the smell of chicken makes her nauseated. She can't stand even the smell of meat. And she thrives on fruit. She'll have a grapefruit juice for breakfast and be fine until lunch. For lunch, she'll have a salad. And she does eat, I've insisted she eats some eggs. And they do patients like that do like dairy products. So, of course, raw milk cheese and some raw milk yogurt, but minimal animal protein. And she's been with me 18 years with cancer and she thrives. And she will tell a practitioner what she likes. She said, I like fruit, I like vegetables. And the idea that she's going to end up with glucose intolerance and insulin resistance and all those things. Not with a patient with her metabolism. With a strong sympathetic system, they never get insulin resistance. And they eat huge amounts of fruit. And those are the patients, horrors, that can tolerate grains. And Kelly and I discussed this because she kind of went away from grains. These are patients, she's been eating grains for 18 years, got rid of her cancer, and it hasn't caused inflammation. They thrive on it. But I have other patients that come in here, if they eat grains, they're going to get sick. They need to be on meat. So often a patient will tell you what they should be on. Like a balanced patient who likes a lot of food, they'll do well at a smorgasbord. Kelly used to say your balanced patients will tell you, my greatest joy is to be at a buffet where there are all kinds of foods, fruits, vegetables, grains, fish, poultry, cheese. They like a variety of foods. They'll tell you that. So you can often tell just from a clinical history if you keep your eyes open and get rid of your preconceived notions of the truth. And then you can adjust the supplements accordingly. A lot of patients do terribly on the shotgun approach to supplements, where they're overloaded with supplements, half of them which are appropriate for them, half of them which are not appropriate. The doses can be wrong, and you can work it out. I mean, just from what I said earlier about someone who's on a plant-based diet needs B1, B2, B3, those things. Someone who's on a meat diet needs B12, pantothenic acid, choline, inositol, PABA, not a lot of C. The meat eaters are the ones that don't do well with large doses of C. They don't do well with large doses of D. So if you listen to your patient, they'll tell you what they need.
You just have to take the time to listen. Doc, I really appreciate you sharing that. I know your program is primarily nutritional in orientation. How do you feel like a patient's sort of psychology and maybe even spiritual orientation fit into their treatment course?
When I met Kelly in July of 1981, I was very biochemically oriented, and I thought, Kelly's program is great. It's 100% nutritional, biochemical, a sophisticated autonomic physiology. I love that kind of stuff. Kind of nerdy. I like that stuff. And I was watching him work with patients in that summer of 1981, and he mentioned something about the spirituality of the patient. I was kind of taken aback, and that's not where I was operating from. And after the patient left, I said, Dr. Kelly, what percentage of disease or cancer do you think is nutritional? What percent is psychological? What percent is spiritual? And he said, well, that's easy. And he said, it's 100% nutritional biochemical, which is the answer I wanted and expected. He waited about 10 seconds. Oh, it's 100% psychological, which threw me for a loop. And then about 10 seconds later, he said it's 100% spiritual in everybody. He said, including in you. You just haven't realized it yet. And of course, it would take a number of years for me to be smart enough to understand the wisdom of that brief encounter with Kelly. But in every patient, we're not laboratory animals, even though the academic medical world wants us to be laboratory animals. We're not. We're far more complex. We have a very complex psychology and a spiritual outlook. And if those are not addressed by the practitioner, it doesn't matter what diet you put them on or what supplements they take. The mind controls the brain controls the autonomic nervous system, the autonomic nervous system controls everything else. So if the mind isn't working right, and it can be physiological, they need certain neurotransmitters, it could be psychological. A lot of my breast cancer patients grew up in very difficult, abusive kind of family situations, and until that's addressed and dealt with, that cancer is going to be stubborn. And you really have to address that. You can't ignore it as a practitioner. So this is not, this is time-intensive work, but you got to get into that stuff because often it'll undermine the biochemical approach that we use. On the surface, what we do is biochemical, nutritional, of course, and very sophisticated. All this is how we manipulate the autonomic nervous system. But if you don't address the psychology or the spirituality, which a lot of patients really need to feel complete and to heal, they won't. And if the psychology is out of balance, the brain's going to be out of balance, the autonomic nervous system is going to be out of balance, and that can override whatever you do nutritionally. So you often have to deal with that. In different patients, there'll be a different component that's most prominent. Sometimes it's largely, physical. They worked in an asbestos mine, they have mesothelioma. But even there, there are people working in asbestos mines that don't get mesothelioma, so there can always be a psychological or spiritual aspect in the person that gets it. You have to address this. You have to approach it cautiously, because we're not preaching to patients, but you've got to address those and find out how the patient can enlarge not just the physical aspect of the body, but psychological and spiritual. So I think it's very important, and I had to learn that being absolutely against it, that any role at all, and thinking it was all nutritional.
Well, first of all, how do you set that up right with patients? How do you sort of get them realizing, like you say, address it? How do you do that? And then secondly, what is the best relationship between a patient and practitioner in that way? What is the best sort of reverence, empowerment, teamwork? What does that look like?
I think teamwork's a good word. I think the physician should not be the dictator, the tyrant, the boss, or the bully, which is often the way it is in orthodox medicine. Sometimes in alternative medicine too. But you should be a teacher. The reason they're coming to you is because they assume you know more than they do. And you have to be willing to teach them. And it's time intensive. You can't do that in a 15-minute office visit. You have to be willing to teach the patient what they need to do to get well. Now, interestingly enough, we never initially address psychological or spiritual things. We probably turn a lot of patients off. It happens organically. We find as patients improve physically, biochemically, physiologically, as their brain works better with all the nutrition we do, and ultimately we're trying to get the nervous system to work better and in balance, they themselves will start bringing up psychological and spiritual issues. They'll start looking into spiritual things. And my patients are variable. I have atheists as patients, I have Muslims as patients, I have devout Christians as patients, and everybody will approach the spiritual aspect somewhat differently, and that's okay as long as they get some fulfillment of that need, and we find humans really need that. So it tends, interestingly enough, and this is something, again, I learned from Kelly, he said, you don't have to proselytize the patient. When it's time for them to bring up psychological issues, like I want to tell you something of what happened to me when I was 6 years old after they've been on the program the first year, and you listen. And, if they need a therapist or if they need some kind of counselor, you do that, or if they need a spiritual guide, you do that. I have one fellow that has a very, very sophisticated psychic. Because look, I'm about as far removed in my training as a psychic as could ever be. Yeah. This woman is very talented, and I'll be darned if she isn't really helping him. Now, I'm helping him with the biochemical stuff and the physiological, nutritional stuff, but he's reached another level of health since he started consulting with her, and she's very low-key, very well-known, and she psychic kind of like, a gypsy in the back room somewhere. She's a very sophisticated, she calls herself an energetic healer. But she picked up a lot of things in him that really had to be dealt with, that he's dealing with. So often, patients will start looking for someone like that, and they'll find something that satisfies them, that really opens them up, or brings them to another level of health. And in his case, it's a very good example. We were controlling his bone marrow cancer, and when he started seeing this, let's call her a healer, who uses energetics rather than nutrition, although she respects what I do completely, he really got to another level of health, and she unlocked some blocks in his psychology that really were important for his healing. So different patients will need different things. They will tell you. You just have to listen. If you're not listening, you're not going to hear it.
That's such a great point. And, with the Functional Forum and what we're doing is really trying to create communities of practitioners with MDs and chiropractors and acupuncturists and nurses and nutritionists and coaches and energetic healers coming together to communicate, so at least they know that they exist and they can talk about these kind of things. And it's very gratifying to hear yourself, a conventionally trained immunologist and doctor, speaking about these kind of things. I think it's a really important part of medicine, and you shared so much in a short period of time, and I really appreciate all of that. And I think that anyone who's listening could have got a lot out of that, especially as we move into a paradigm of individualized medicine. Doc, this whole summit is about healthcare from scratch, and I've sort of started this summit with the idea that we need to really rethink the way that we're dealing with chronic disease, because the skills and the basis and the baseline that's necessary is very different from acute disease. And we've sort of taken this acute disease mentality into chronic disease, and it's really not working. So first of all, I'd love to get your thoughts on that. And secondly, just to get an idea of what you feel like if you were to sort of play your part and contribute to this new model of chronic disease, what would be your unique perspective or your unique contribution to that system?
When you first used the phrase start from scratch, my ears really picked up at that, because I think that's exactly what needs to be done. I have no illusion or delusion that somehow, I'm going to change the conventional medical world. It's like a big battleship. It's not going to change. It's too powerful. They're too ingrained. The doctors in there, and they're not going to change for everybody. Anybody. They think they're the smartest people on earth, and what they know is the only thing anyone needs to know. They're not going to change. You have to start from scratch. You have to get rid of that, or let that system exist in a parallel universe, and then start from scratch with a completely new system that's based on nutrition and diet and appropriate psychology and even spirituality, ours, which is something that conventional doctors just ignore. You have to start from scratch. You can't change what already exists. You can't make what already exists better. It isn't going to happen. I've come out of that world, believe me, I know. And I've tried too. We've tried to make inroads. We spent years trying to get our book published from our Kelly study. We couldn't do it. I know how resistant they are, how rigid and authoritarian and dogmatic they are. You have to start from scratch. And the fact is, when you start from scratch with a nutritional model, it actually is going to work better. So you beat them in the marketplace. I mean, we have no dearth of patients. We're busy as we can be. Unfortunately, we have to turn patients down because so many people want to do this just from word of mouth. I don't have, Harvard Medical School lauding me or anything like that, or the New England Journal writing editorials about how wonderful I am, or somebody nominating for the Nobel Prize. That's never going to happen. But you beat them in the marketplace. You get patients well. The neighbor sees it, they come. So you can set up an alternative parallel universe. It's sad that it has to happen, but that's the way to do it. And start from scratch, to use your term, is exactly what I think needs to be done. With like-minded physicians and practitioners and nurses and chiropractors, you set up a new universe where it's based on nutrition and natural healing, which can be very sophisticated and very powerful. It's not just, buying some supplements at the health food store. What we do is, very physiologically and biochemically powerful interventions. And it works, even with advanced cancer. So you can set up an alternative model, start from scratch, build another model, and believe me, there are people who won't want to stop smoking, who won't want to change their diet, are always going to want chemo rather than what we do, and they would rather die than do coffee. I mean, fine, they should go to Sloan Kettering. But there's certainly room to have an alternative universe, because what the conventional doctors have done, despite the fact they've been in control for the last 300 years, it isn't working very well. Just isn't working. So we need not only a question of starting from scratch theoretically, but we need it, because what the power structure that exists is not very effective.
Absolutely. And what do you think would be, to obviously the highest work of a physician is to prevent cancer and these degenerative diseases, and that's what obviously that we could do. What would you say would be the sort of the key components to a truly preventive medical system?
Well, kind of like what we do in our office, individualized appropriate diet with quality foods, organically raised, non-GMOs, no chemicals, clean food. That's the essence. Weston Price's studies, every traditional group he studied that had excellent health, they all lived on locally grown, locally harvested, locally hunted food with no chemicals, no preservatives, no additives, no industry, no pesticides. The food has to be clean. If we want good health, and we want a new medical model where prevention will be more important than treatment. If you prevent disease, you don't have to treat it. That should be the essence and basis of the new medical model, which is what we're talking about. So you got to start with clean food. Food is the essence. Food is the foundation of everything. You need good quality food, clean food, which fortunately more and more farmers are turning to organic, and there's a demand on it. So people are really starting to turn toward that in a major way, to the point that even Monsanto's getting nervous about it. People don't want GMO, which is great. So people need to choose good quality food, properly raised, good quality, good agricultural practices, like my friend Joel Salatin out in Virginia, who's really the ultimate organic farmer. That's what we need. Raw milk should be available, raw cheese should be available, those kind of things, simple things, but make a big difference. And then for people that are sick, the proper supplementation, which is, we think we have one good model for that, which can be taught. There's nothing secretive about it. I learned it from Kelly. And in this world with all the pollution, we don't live in an idyllic world or an ideal world. It's not paradise. It's a polluted cesspool. Really, it's only getting worse each year with the infestation of the GMOs everywhere now, and overuse of pesticides and Roundup and all that stuff. So people need to do extraordinary techniques like we do, the coffee enemas and liver flushes and all those things. I was once confronted at a conference he was a well-intentioned oncologist who came to hear me speak. So to his credit, he was open-minded enough to come hear me speak at a lecture. But at the end of the lecture, the guy said, coffee enemas are completely unnatural. And he looked at me expecting me to go into this defensive mode. And I said, you're absolutely right, which completely diffused him. And I said, when the world is remade perfect and there's no more pollution, I do them myself. I said, I won't have to do them nor will my patients, but as long as the world gets worse each year with more pollution, more pesticides, more heavy metals in the air, there's mercury in the air in New York City now, in the air, I just get it from breathing right now. As long as that's the case, we have to do extraordinary measures to keep our bodies working efficiently to get rid of this extra load of toxins for which our bodies were never designed. So in this world, until it's remade perfect, you have to use detoxification routines. So diet, supplements, detoxification, three basic components of a new model in medicine from my perspective. And this is the way we approach patients.
Yeah, that makes so much sense. In the initial lecture at this summit, Chris Kresser talked about the exposome, the sort of sum of everything you're exposed to, either coming from the outside or, like you said, the inside, and the autonomic nervous system. And the nervous system could be a perfect example of that. So in these times that we live in, with so much that is unnatural about the world that we live in, how can doctors and practitioners help their patients to sort of keep ahead of the curve?
Well, the first thing is the doctors have to live by their rules too. They should be eating organically. They should be taking supplements that help them and do detoxification. Be a model for your patients. But if you address your patients from a nutritional model, there is enormous things you can do. I mean, what we do is very sophisticated. Yeah, we're treating advanced cancer, et cetera, et cetera. But, the basic things you can do. Get people off white sugar, white flour. Teach them about the dangers of GMO, the importance of doing organic. I still hear, what difference does organic make? It makes an enormous difference. Sir Albert Howard was the great English researcher who traveled the world teaching traditional peoples how to grow plants without pesticides and chemicals. And he's proved beyond a doubt the nutritional benefit of organic food. The fact that plants and animals raised in a natural way tend to be resistant to bugs and funguses and all those kind of things. And you don't even need the pesticides that agriculture can survive if it's organic without using all these chemicals. So you have to teach your patient about the value of leading a natural life. And they wouldn't be coming to you as an alternative type doctor unless they already had that interest. But you have to really, we spend a lot of time with them. We teach them about how the cleanliness of the food is so important, why raw milk is more valuable than pasteurized milk, and there's studies that show that. So you have to teach them and be an example by living by your own rules. And intervene. What we're doing isn't just treating the flu or diabetes or putting them on insulin. You're trying to recreate their lifestyles in a healthier, more productive way. And you have to be a teacher. Here again, instead of the dictator and the tyrant, you have to be the teacher and just show them that this is the way to live. And one of the things my patients say, they always say, we know you live by the rules. That always reassures us. So live by your rules yourself, and then just teach your patients why you do. And they'll listen to it. They wouldn't be in your office unless they already were interested. And you can really teach it. Every time you convert one of your patients, you have another, evangelical proponent who's going to go out there and talk about organic to their cousins and their families, and that's what happens. So that's how you do it. You spread it through teaching.
It sounds like what you're talking about is really delivering remarkable medicine. And I love the word remarkable because it's so good that you remark on it to other people. And, that's really the way that integrative natural medicine has developed in the last 30 years, is that people have had such a remarkable experience with it that they've shared that to other people. And then, through that process, it's come full circle. I'd love to just finish our time here today, Dr. Gonzalez, talking about legacy, because obviously you've been on the coalface of cancer care here in New York and helping people from all around the world. What would you hope that your legacy would be to medicine, and what do you think of the chances are of that happening?
I kind of have humble goals at this point. My goal is to get the next patient who walks into my office well, doing whatever I need to do to get him well. So that's my real motivation. That's what gets me up in the morning, and that's my goal through the day. I don't tend to think too much about grander things, because you can get really lost doing that and go nuts and worrying about whether the AMA is going to accept us or whether New England Journal is going to write a nice article. It's not going to happen. I just think the next thing I have to do today is get that patient that's about to come into my office well, or help them continue on their road to wellness. That's the way I approach it. I don't have grander motives than that. In terms of legacy, my sadness is that, and again, I didn't develop this therapy. The roots go back 100 years. And, I didn't develop coffee animals. They've been around for 100 years. But I found in Kelly's work, so it's not my work. It's not my ego. I want this grandeur. I want this, this lauding and adulation. It's not my work. I didn't develop it. I'm just a good technician. Geniuses developed it before me. But it works so well. And we see the difference in patients every day. Like the woman yesterday with the metastatic breast cancer, so 18 years later with us, a great patient, wonderful lady who eats huge amounts of fruit. You want this to be able to be continued for those patients who want it in the future after I'm gone or get hit by a bus. You want it to be available, even if in a small way, so that those who want it can have it, and those who want to go to Sloan Kettering, sure, they should go to Sloan Kettering. So it would be nice to have people who are trained properly to do it. And we know it can be transferred. I learned it from Kelly, and Dr. Isaacs, my colleague, learned it from Kelly, and we worked together as well. And Kelly Brogan is now coming in, and we're trying to share our information. So it can be transferred. It's nice to have Kelly getting interested, because we want, a younger doctor who could at least take some of this information and use it and keep it alive. So in terms of my motivation is to get the next patient well. My idea of a legacy is that the therapy would be kept alive, even if in a small way, and so that patients who want it can have it.
Absolutely. Well, I hope that this summit in a small way will be able to, communicate that and create lasting assets that can be, listened to and used by physicians in the future. And I also feel like the momentum of what's happening in medicine is, even though we're a long way behind, is heading in the right direction, because I think patients and doctors are, especially younger ones, are more cynical of what's come before them, and they see that it's not working. They see a lot of sick people. They see a lot of chronic and degenerative disease. And so I hope that the demand for this sort of information, will increase exponentially. And there are lots of examples of people throughout history whose legacy is really being developed a lot after their work. And I hope that it'll be a bit sooner than that, but we'll see. That's what we're trying to do to accelerate the evolution of medicine. So, I just want to thank you for sharing all of these. Any parting words for those doctors and practitioners and maybe some patients that are listening today?
Yeah, even the worst types of cancer, the worst degenerative diseases, rheumatoid arthritis, advanced lupus, can be reversed with good nutrition. We see it every day in our office. So don't despair when you have really sick patients coming into your office. Just try and learn as much as you can. You can get these patients well using a non-toxic nutritional approach, and we see it every day. So keep your learning going, keep your studying going, and keep working with your patients to get them well using natural, non-toxic nutritional approaches.
Thank you so much. So this has been the Evolution of Medicine Summit. Thank you so much to Dr. Nicholas Gonzalez for sharing so many great thoughts and ideas and all of your skill that has come from all of these years in practice. I trust that there will be probably some questions and thought-provoking ideas that have been mentioned here. And so if you have questions, please put it in the box below, and we'll see how many of those that we can get to with our team. But I just wanted to finish today by saying a great thank you for being here on the Evolution of Medicine Summit. It's been a great pleasure to hear you lecture and to experience some of this great information. And thanks so much everyone also for tuning in and spending time on the summit, to spend time listening to practitioners and doctors like Dr. Gonzalez. And whether or not this work moves forward and becomes part of the new medical system doesn't really depend on anyone else apart from you listening. And if you're listening to this and the ideas resonate with you, you're in the right starting point. And we're going to be providing more and more resources over the coming months and years to be able to facilitate and accelerate your health learning journey. So from myself, James Maskell, your host, and Dr. Nicholas Gonzalez, it's been a pleasure welcoming you to the Evolution of Medicine Summit, and we'll see you next time.